The NEH's Dialogues on the Experience of War program is relatively new. It's just a couple years old, and its aim is to open up conversations about these issues using the humanities as a way into them so that you begin the conversation by looking at humanities products. So Andre Merrick and I proposed a special topics course, War Trauma and the Humanities. So a regular GSU course with regular GSU students in it. But our proposal was to bring in the 5 student veterans to serve as discussion leaders and to help make connections between their experience and the literature that we were reading. We were thrilled to get the grant because it allowed us to move forward with the class, which has been a great success, I think, for everyone involved. But it also lets us take the conversation out of the classroom. The grant drew some off-campus attention, and we get to have public events, including this town hall this evening.
So another question, with the 5 student groups, can you explain what they do and how you prepare them for that experience in the class?
First of all, we selected the 5 after a competitive process, so we went into it confident that they were well suited for the job. Before the class began, we spent 6 weeks in meetings dealing with some of the content, so introducing course material, learning some historical context, learning about resources that are available. We also addressed the skills side, so how do you read a poem? How do you redirect discussion when it gets off topic? Things like that, so that they had a chance to practice those things during the training sessions. And then at the end of the training, we did some planning with them for the first course sessions that we would have. In the course itself, their main role is leading discussion in small groups, which have been set up a little bit differently each week. And they also take a significant role in whole class discussion and all the class activities.
Can you give us some examples of the range of literature that you use for this course, and why did you select that?
Nearly everything that we included in the course was written by a veteran or someone else who had frontline experience, but within that we looked for a broad range of genre, and we cover more than 100 years of time from the beginning of the First World War up until right now.
Well, I was going into a tent. Another corporal was coming out, and he stopped me and he said, "Corporal Mason, what's wrong?" And I stepped back because I wasn't sure what he was talking about. But he said, "You're not smiling." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "If you're not smiling, we're in trouble. I need you to smile." I had to go have a moment with God after that conversation because I let something get to me, and it was reflecting. I had to change the way I thought in that moment. We were that close.
Dr. Johnson, is this a poem that is typical of World War I poetry?
The First World War poetry is obviously quite various, but one thing in the selection that Robert chose that I think is fairly characteristic is that we see in that poem, the father of the dead soldier is kind of a stand-in, I think, for a wider audience at home that doesn't know what it's like, and on some level can't know what it's like. But the poem is an attempt to convey very vividly the sights, the sounds, the smells of it, and the lasting emotional impact that it has on those who are there. And a lot of the poems do that. Some are angry at the people at home, and others are not. But I think that's a very characteristic move of the poems.
Victor, after hearing Robert read that piece of literature, does that also resonate with you?
Yeah, right away it comes to an experience of seeing an officer, how he experienced the death of a Marine that was his subordinate, one of the squad leaders. And you could see how he still operated and still would conduct himself as an officer would in theater. But when he was separated from the field in the birthing area where we were away sometime, you could see where he was suffering. You know, he wasn't eating, he was kind of distanced from himself. And it was kind of the idea of the burden of command, and you saw it in the officers that a lot of times they kind of put this persona that they had to carry on, and that the list didn't were allowed to see that. But I did see it. And also with that, with the same Marine, also it made me think about his mother, back home. And I found out sometime later that she had found out that he had died on Easter Sunday. So I couldn't imagine what that would have, I can't even imagine what that would have felt like. I understand how I felt and how I could see it in the officer, but very different for the mother at home.
Victor, you chose a different piece of literature that focuses on the war in Vietnam. Timothy O'Brien's short story and book, The Things They Carried. You have mentioned in class on a number of occasions that this particular selection reminds you of your own actions in Fallujah. Can you please share this selection for us?
They carried all the emotional baggage of men who might die: grief, terror, love, longing. These were intangibles, but the intangibles had their own mass and specific gravity. They had tangible weight. They carried shameful memories. They carried the common secret of cowardice. Men killed and died because they were embarrassed not to.
Thank you, Victor. Can you also explain why this speaks to you personally?
It was actually a point in the class. We were going over the things they carried by O'Brien, and one of my peers related to is like, do men, do guys fight because they're embarrassed not to? And it brought me back to a real world moment. And this is even before Fallujah. This was actually for the invasion of Iraq. We were ambushed in Al-Qud, and then part of the ambush, there was this building that needed to be cleared. There was a grenade thrown in. The grenade tossed up all the dust and everything that was in there. And I remember I was the first one to go into that room. And when I went into the building, there was a little shack. It was filled with smoke. And I remember just, for that moment, because you had time to think, well, the dust cleared up. Like, oh, shoot. Like, this is different. This is close in your face. I might have to engage someone. And for a moment there, I was like, why am I just standing here? Because I'm not going to lose face with my fellow Marines. I'm going to stand my ground because that's what they expect me to do. And because, frankly, I was more fearful of showing fear to my fellow Marines than of fear of death at that moment. So in that respect, it resonated with me. And that it changed over time with Fallujah itself. I learned that we fought for different reasons. We carried different things, the loss of people. And it's hard to explain that. And as O'Brien writes, it's the intangible. How do you explain how much that weighs on us when we lose someone? And we saw that more so in my second deployment in Fallujah.
Dr. Johnson, Robert, Victor, any final thoughts about the ways in which this class and literature helps us to better understand, the experiences of combat veterans and the trauma that's often suffered?
So I'd like to add to what Dr. Johnson already said. It does, these pieces that we covered in this class alone, which there's more, transcends time. And not only is this a tool that we can use to speak to non-veterans to impart our experiences and try to explain through the poetry, film, or whatever have you, but it's also a tool for veterans ourselves, veterans of most recent conflicts, because we can look back to the veterans who have gone through this already and learn from them how they were able to express themselves. And instead of trying to reinvent the wheel in a sense, using them to guide us in how we can best express ourselves. And I know Robert does film. He does veteran pieces of film as well. Other veterans who are coming back, now they have a way by looking back in time and reading other pieces.
Yeah, I never expected to connect with the kind of literature that we saw, especially in World War I, until I started reading. And nearly everything in the book that we read was something that I could relate to. There's a language, and there are things that we just share. It doesn't matter if it's World War I, World War II, Vietnam War. And because of what I've had the opportunity to be exposed to, I've been able to have even better conversations with other veterans throughout the program. You know, strangers. We just come in contact with one another and continue
Yeah.
to talk.
You know, Mario, you've also selected correspondence from the collection Operation Homecoming. You selected an excerpt written by a mother about her son returning from deployment. Can you please share this with us?
This week he's due home, this son of mine. I wonder, is he nervous? Is he excited? This child who was so kind and sensitive, so caring of his mother. I can't even imagine what war has done to him. Is he expecting everything to be just the same as when he left? I remember some veterans saying they wanted everything to be exactly the same when they came home. And when it wasn't, it was a nasty shock. This week is full of questions, full of doubts, full of excitement. I walk around with a smile on my face, despite my concerns. I get to see him and hug him, to count his fingers and toes, to sit near and just watch him sleep, and remember all the times I did the same thing when he was 2 and 10 and 15, to pretend, just for a while, that he is not a grown-up soldier in a war. He is just my son, here, back in my home.
Can you please explain why you selected this excerpt and how does it connect with you?
I selected this particular piece because it touches me in 2 ways. The first way is upon leaving, you're leaving, my son, but I also left my mother. At the time I wasn't married, so I left my mother, I left my sister. And this is coming from a mother regarding her son, her child, coming home from war and what has war done to, her child. I had never asked my mother, how did this play into her emotions and how, what was her day like, wondering if her daughter was okay. So that was the first way that it touched me. And the second way was, I was the mother, being a world away, I would call it, for my son. I did miss the first steps and I missed the first words, the first birthday. I missed those first milestones. And just wanting to make sure that, in his mind, that he would still know me. And then that was the nasty shock I came home to. He didn't know me, reaching out to my own son, he, pulled back, as if I was a stranger. And so that was a great shock to me, coming home, from an obligation, of course, but my own son not knowing who I was. So that was the other part that really connected with me.